It is bitter cold outside, which is typical for January, our coldest month of the year here in New York. Still though, we have a lot of gardening to talk about, even outside. That's what we're going to do today. I'm going to show you some plants that can bloom during the coldest weeks of the year. Unbelievable. I'm going to take a couple of my potted plants that I have outside. I'm going to take those back in. Ooh, and I'm going to talk about one of my favorite botanical words, Thermonasty. It's how some plants can stay green even though it is really cold outside. A very fun thing to see. Okay, first I'm going to put on a very heavy winter jacket and then we're going to head outside.
Whew, okay, I also needed to put on a hat. The cold is nasty outside. And that actually reminds me of one of my favorite botanical words, Thermonasty. No, it's not an insult. You can actually see it in action right behind me. My rhododendron is starting to wilt. Thermo relates to heat. Think of thermometers, which measure heat. Nastic has to do with plant movement. Just like when a plant starts to wilt because it doesn't have enough water, well, thermonastic movement allows rhododendrons to wilt in the cold, so that way it can protect themselves from the winter sun. The strong winter sun causes evaporation on really broad leaves like a rhododendron that the plant can't replace because temperatures are way below freezing. So it would destroy the plant. That's why so few plants in this climate have big leaves during the winter time. They usually all fall off, or you have like pine trees or arborvitaes, which have very fine needle-like leaves, and cypress have very fine leaves, but not rhododendrons. They have these really broad, waxy leaves that can change their shapes based on what the temperature is like outside. And this is really cool because rhododendrons are like a natural thermometer. I can actually tell you what the temperature is like outside just by looking at the leaves behind me. Okay, so I want to give you a closer look at this. You can see that the leaves are just starting to wilt a little bit. Earlier this morning, not only were the leaves wilting, but they were also curling into themselves. And when they curl into themselves, it means that the temperature is about 25 degrees or colder. And once it gets below 20 degrees, the leaves curl so deeply into themselves that a rhododendron could look like it's dead. It would be totally bare looking because the leaves are so curled up. So it really is very temperature dependent. And since these are only slightly curled, I can tell you that the temperature outside is about 30 degrees. So I'm going to go on the weather app right now, and lo and behold, here we go. 32 degrees according to the app. I would say in my backyard, maybe a little bit colder. Now, by the way, you might be thinking, why am I so dressed up for 32 degrees? The feels like temperature is 20 right now, and when the wind is blowing, it feels like it's in the teens. Like I mentioned before, it was 13 when I left the gym a little bit ago. So the really cool thing about thermonastic movement like rhododendrons is it allows us to have beautiful, beautiful shrubs with broad leaves like you would see with tropical plants. And that's what I love about rhododendrons. Even though they are not tropical, they really give off that look. By the way, can we appreciate how brutal this wind is? Another thing I like to remind people about rhododendrons is all of the buds for the spring have already developed. So make sure that you don't prune a rhododendron after June, because July, August, September, it's starting to produce these buds. And certainly by this time of the year, it has big fat buds that are ready to burst in May. Now, rhododendrons aren't the only plants that do this. I also have seen it on some of my windmill palms and Fatsia Japonica. That's another plant that I have in my garden that also will this time of the year. I want to talk about some other plants that are looking really good. This is one of my favorite plants in January in my garden. They're called Helebores. Right now they're a little droopy because it's very cold outside today, but they'll perk up as soon as the weather warms up, even just a little bit. If we get a 40-degree day, they're nice and perky and they'll be in bloom. I'll show you a close-up of the blooms in a second, but these are covered with buds right now that are just ready to burst open as soon as we get an afternoon that's in the 40s or so. And what I love about Helebores is that they actually keep this really beautiful evergreen foliage all year long. Even during the summer, it really doesn't lose any of its greenery. It is just perky and gorgeous, and it does great in a shade garden. This plant gets absolutely no sunshine until probably late March, and then in October it also will have no sunshine. So it is in the shade for months, and during the summertime it only gets a little sun, like a few hours. So really cool plant. Look at these beautiful flower buds that are ready to burst open despite the cold. This is pretty remarkable, and the plant is just loaded with these. I'll see if I can find another bunch for you. Here we go. Do you see some more flower buds? These are white, but I've seen them come in reds and yellows. Some of them bloom a little later. Some of them bloom a little earlier. Some of them have some really beautiful foliage. I was at the New York Botanical Garden last year, and one of their Helebores had almost palm-like foliage, and that was really pretty. So this is a very fun plant to grow in the shade garden. And the cast iron plant is another beautiful shade garden plant that actually seems to do pretty well down to about 10 degrees or so. After 10 degrees, this plant will die to the ground, and they are very slow growing. So 10 degrees is really the limit to have this as a nice landscape plant. And we haven't dropped below 10 in quite some time, so these are looking really good in the shade garden right now. This, by the way, is another really fantastic plant that is also in bloom this time of the year. The flowers themselves have actually fallen off, but Fatsia Japonica is just such a wonderful landscape plant. It's a little droopy today because of how cold it is, but these leaves bounce right back up as soon as the weather warms up. And you can see how large the leaves are too. They're much larger than my hand, so this is just another great example of a plant that has beautiful leaves. Okay, I want to take a little break from talking about plants to spend a moment to talk about the pond, just because I've gotten so many questions about my koi pond and the little fishies. They are perfectly happy, and the reason why is because if you look very carefully at the corner, and I'll show you a closer look in a minute, I have an aerator going. So this aerator helps keep the ice from forming across the whole surface of the pond. And once the whole surface of the pond is covering in ice, the fish can't breathe anymore. So it's very important that you have a little hole in the pond so that way there's that transfer of air into the water. So the aerator helps with that. I do turn off the waterfall feature because I don't want the pipes to freeze. My first winter, I actually did not turn off the waterfall feature and everything was fine. It was such a mild winter anyway. But in this climate, it freezes pretty deeply, and you just want to make sure that you do have that. I have a couple of other cool plants right above my pond, and they are just such a joy to watch. My Viburnum, which I call my winter hydrangea, because if you look carefully, you'll see the white flowers on them. They actually do bloom in the summer as well, so they really bloom almost all year long. They're semi-evergreen. This Viburnum species is a semi-evergreen that will drop its leaves when it's really cold outside, and it'll stay green just like this when it is a mild winter like this one has been so far. The leaves just are absolutely gorgeous on a mild day. You can see right now they are also exhibiting Thermonasty, where they look wilted, but they will unfold, and we'll even see flowers here in the month of December, sometimes January if it's mild. So it really depends on the weather, but regardless, even when it's cold out, it's a really nice focal point. Below this, you can see a Christmas fern, it's called, and that is because it stays green even during Christmas time. So that is right over here on the bank of the pond, and I just love these evergreen ferns. But holly ferns, although they're only marginally cold tolerant in our climate, are an even better choice if you want that almost tropical-like fern. But as far as ferns go, the tassel fern's one of my favorite. They have this fern-like foliage that reminds me of a tree fern, but of course they don't get quite as large. And they stay really nice and green and do so good in full shade. This one's actually covered in branches and yard debris, and it's just thriving. I also really love hollies like this one behind me in my front yard. It's not just the beautiful evergreen leaves on varieties like Nellie Stevens, which just has this beautiful shape to it, but it's also the berries. I love seeing these red berries this time of the year. It's not just festive for the holidays, which have now passed, but it's also just a nice little pop of color. Shockingly, despite the cold, I do have some potted plants outside, like my waggy palm, these Dyckia, which are a very cold-hardy bromeliad. This variety is called cherry cola, and it is fantastic in the cold. I have some kale. We have some geese flying above me. Please don't poop on me. Oh, please don't poop on me. Anyway, we have some kale, and that will stay outside. But I'm going to bring a lot of these kind of subtropical plants into the garage tonight just because it's just consistently in the teens every single night. Temperatures aren't getting much above freezing. I have some camellias that are in containers, and, you know, they have beautiful fat flower buds on them, but I really don't want to get damaged by the cold. These potted plants are exposed to a lot more cold than if they were in the ground. So I'm also experimenting with this new eucalyptus variety called Glacier, I believe. And so far so good. The leaves are actually nice and plump still. But I'm going to bring this in the garage also. I'm going to get ahead and do that. And thank you for watching. Happy gardening, and I'll see you all soon. Bye.